The Canada 2025 Grand Prix did not start as a particularly extraordinary career. Ferrari had arrived in Montreal hoping to consolidate his technical evolution after an irregular but promising season. With an increasingly comfortable Lewis Hamilton behind the wheel of the SF-25 and a determined Charles Leclerc to reaffirm his role within the team, the atmosphere in the paddock was optimistic. But what nobody anticipated was that the most determining moment of the race would not be born from a masterful strategy or a controversial maneuver, but of more absurd chance, a small animal crossing the track. It was on lap number 13, just in the second sector, when the incident occurred. In a fast, Hamilton area, completely concentrated in following the rhythm of the leading squad, had no reaction margin. His SF-25 collided with a marmot that had entered the asphalt, apparently from the wooded zone close to curve 10. At first glance, the car barely shook. There were no screams of alarm or visible change in car behavior for the following seconds. But under the chassis, the damage was already done. This event, as insignificant as it seems in the context of a Formula One career, would be the catalyst to discover one of the best stored secrets of the SF-25, its extreme structural sensitivity. Ferrari took a few turns to understand the magnitude of the impact. Through the car sensors and real-time data, the equipment detected an abrupt fall of aerodynamic load on the right side of the car. The subsequent analysis revealed that the flat background had been drilled and that several aerodynamic fins had been completely detached. These fins, responsible for channeling the airflow to the rear diffuser, are vital to maintain the balance of the car. Its absence not only means a loss in vertical support, but also a deep mismatch in the distribution of forces throughout the vehicle. The loss was estimated at 20 aerodynamic load points, which resulted in a half-second decrease per lap. Half-second. In the language of Formula One, that is equivalent to light years. It meant the immediate end of any podium aspiration for Hamilton. But beyond the final result, the sixth place it managed to maintain, which really turned on the alarms, was the disproportionate performance drop in the face of damage that, in other cars, could have been handled with relative stability. The SF-25, on the other hand, reacted with amazing fragility. This incident exposed what is probably the greatest weakness of the Ferrari technical project. A car built with an aerodynamic architecture so tight and extreme that it does not forgive any imperfection. And it was that lesson, learned in the most unexpected and painful way, which turned an absurd anecdote into a serious warning on the technical path that the Scuderia has taken. Because if the car only works when it is impeccable, how viable it is for a season of more than 20 races full of risks, curbs, rain, pieces flying, and marmotas? The SF-25 is, in essence, the purest reflection of Ferrari's technical ambition in recent years. It is a car born of the need to break with the past, to leave behind the irregularity that marked the previous seasons, and position itself as a true contender against McLaren and Red Bull. However, this break has brought with it unexpected consequences, and the Canadian incident has worked as a trigger to examine each of its design decisions with magnifying glass. Because the problem was not only the loss of performance, but what this loss revealed about the technical philosophy of the team. A machine built with an aggressiveness that may be exceeding the reasonable limits of balance and tolerance. One of the most drastic changes introduced by Ferrari was the implementation of a pull rod type front suspension, abandoning its traditional pushrod system. This choice is not a simple mechanical variation. It represents a radical transformation in how the car interacts with the track. Pull rod offers, in theory, a clear advantage in terms of aerodynamics. By relocating the components towards lower positions, it allows a cleaner air flow towards the bottom of the car, which maximizes the soil effect. But that gain comes with a price. The new suspension has deeply altered the mass distribution, the geometry of the chassis, and the front axle response. Charles Leclerc was the first to notice during the Bahrain test. His comments were immediate and worrisome. The car did not respond as it should in the braking, especially in high lateral load situations. For a pilot like Leclerc, who bases much of his style on stopping late and aggressively, losing that trust translates into a direct performance deficit. Hamilton, meanwhile, tried to adapt more quickly, even modifying his piloting style. However, both coincided with the same thing. The SF-25 is extremely delicate to any imbalance, especially when the rear does not accompany with the same firmness. Curve behavior has become unpredictable. The front of the car seems to float under certain conditions, and any change in the setup requires aggressive compensatory adjustments in other aspects of the car. Ferrari has tried to mitigate these effects through geometry modifications and fine adjustments in stabilizing shock absorbers and bars, but the bottom of the problem is structural. The architecture of the suspension and its integration to the aerodynamic package has generated a car that can be fast, but only under perfectly optimized conditions. To this is added a second critical point, the brake system. Lewis Hamilton, after a career with Mercedes using the carbon industry systems, had to adapt to the use of Brembo brakes in Ferrari. Although Brembo is a first-level manufacturer, the difference in touch, thermal response and progressivity is notorious. Hamilton described the transition as a lottery, a blunt phrase for a pilot of his level. The brake pills do not offer the consistency he needs to take the car to the limit with confidence. And in Formula One, that trust is everything. When a pilot like Hamilton feels that the response of the brake to the millimeter cannot predict, that translates into a more conservative driving in expanded margins and therefore in lost time. It is not a matter of adaptation, but of technical compatibility with its style. Engineers have been working to soften the brake response curve, modifying line pressures and exploring different combinations of pills and discs. But again, the problem goes beyond a simple choice of components. It is how the entire car system is designed to operate within an extremely narrow tolerance window. What was exposed after the incident with the Marmot was not simply physical damage. It was a brutal radiography of the SF-25. A car that, when it is whole, can be competitive, even brilliant, but that, as a piece is altered, loses its identity. Aerodynamics falls apart, stability disappears, and the pilot is exposed without tools to defend itself. And that, in a sport where each curve can decide a championship, is a risk that not even Ferrari can afford to assume. Formula One, in its purest essence, is a sport of balance, between risk and performance, between innovation and reliability. Ferrari, in his search to resurface strongly in this new technical era, has opted for a car concept that borders the ends of that balance. The SF-25 is not a conventional car. It is a declaration of intentions. It is the materialization of a team that wants to leave behind historical limitations and consolidate as the absolute protagonist of the championship. But the incident in Canada, seemingly trivial, but symbolically devastating, forces to ask an uncomfortable question. Can this car take Ferrari to the title under real conditions of a full season? A modern Formula One campaign is not a parade of perfection. It is a chaotic marathon of more than 20 races, with urban circuits, unpredictable weather conditions, traffic, human errors, and inevitable contacts. Cars must survive all that. And this is where the SF-25 shows its greatest weakness. Its performance is conditioned to a fragility that is not compatible with the very nature of the category. It is not enough to be fast when everything is under control. Resilience is needed. A technical structure is needed that forgives errors and maintains reasonable competitiveness even when conditions are not ideal. What happened in Montreal showed that SF-25 does not have that capacity. Its operating window is as narrow that any small damage, even of origin as unlikely as the one that affected it, can turn it into an unrecognizable car. This situation represents a deep problem for Lewis Hamilton. When he signed with Ferrari, he did so looking for a last chance to reconquer the top. His motivation was not economical or symbolic. It was purely competitive. I wanted a car with which I could fight from you with the best, without having to drag the ghosts of questionable technical decisions such as those that marked their last years in Mercedes. However, the British is in an unexpected position. It is not just that the car has defects. It is that these defects seem to be embedded in the DNA of the car. Adapting to a new environment, new piloting tools, engineers with a different philosophy, is already a considerable mental burden. Do it on a car that does not offer consistency aggravates the situation. And place it before a painful dilemma. Wait for Ferrari to rebuild on the march, or assume that this bet could have been, deep down, a trap disguised as opportunity. For the Scuderia, the challenge is just as brutal. Because it's not just about checking a flat background or readjusting a brake system. We are talking about an entire platform that is built on a hypersensitive technical concept. If Ferrari wants to have real options to the title, it will not be enough with patches. You will need to redesign key parts of the car, improve structural tolerance, and work on an evolution that allows to maintain competitiveness even with minor damage. And here time plays against him. The other teams are already evolving their concepts with every weekend. Red Bull, although weakened, is still dangerous in the hands of Verstappen. And McLaren, with Norris and Piastri, is reaching a degree of operational maturity that makes them formidable rivals. Ferrari not only needs to win races. You need to resist wear, avoid strategic errors, and correct a design that today does not allow them to fail. And now, the inevitable question is transferred to you. After everything that has happened, do you really think Ferrari has opted for the right path with the SF-25? Or are we facing another case in which the obsession with technical perfection has ended up disconnecting the car from the practical reality of Formula One modern? Because yes, it is true, the design of the SF-25 is ambitious. It has the potential to be one of the fastest cars of the year. But that potential is only manifested within a framework of ideal conditions that, as we have seen in Canada, can disappear in an instant due to a variable as absurd as an animal on the track. Do you think it is sensible to build a championship car on such a fragile structure? Or are you convinced that top teams can no longer afford versatile cars, but should bet on the whole or nothing? And let's not forget the other great angle. If you were part of Ferrari's technical team, what would your priority be right now? Let it know in the comments.